Millionaire CEO saw wife as an alternate for his first wife. Only when she left with a divorce letter, he cried. Millionaire CEO Alfred Harrington stands frozen, a crumpled letter in his trembling hands. Tears stream down his chiseled face for the first time in years as he watches the love of his life, or the woman he thought was just a replacement, walk away, her pregnant belly cradled under a flowing white gown, a bouquet discarded at her feet like forgotten dreams. "Ruth," he whispers, his voice breaking, realizing too late that the alternate had become his everything. Before we begin the beautiful story, please subscribe, it's free, and it makes my day 100% better. Also like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The envelope lay on the marble kitchen counter like a white flag of surrender, crisp and final against the cold stone. Alfred Morrison stood frozen in his Brioni suit, his fingers still clutching his briefcase handle, staring at the two words written in Ruth's careful handwriting, "I'm sorry." He didn't need to open it to know what it contained. The silence in their sprawling mansion spoke volumes. No soft jazz playing from the living room where Ruth usually painted in the afternoons, no gentle humming from the kitchen where she'd experiment with recipes she'd never gotten quite right, no warm presence that had filled the cold corners of his life for the past 5 years. She was gone. Alfred Morrison, CEO of Morrison Technologies, a man who commanded boardrooms and controlled billions, a man whose single email could make or break careers, stood utterly paralyzed by a simple envelope. His steel-gray eyes, which had stared down countless competitors without flinching, now blurred with something he hadn't felt in over a decade, the sharp, visceral pain of loss. But this wasn't just any loss. This was Ruth. His Ruth. Or was she? The question that had haunted their entire marriage now mocked him from every corner of the empty house. Had Ruth ever truly been his, or had she always been nothing more than a stand-in for the woman he could never forget? To understand how Alfred Morrison, a man who had everything yet possessed nothing, arrived at this moment of devastating clarity, we must travel back 7 years, to a rain-soaked evening in Boston when his world first shattered, and to the desperate choices that followed. 7 years earlier, Alfred Morrison had been a different man, or perhaps, more accurately, he had been more fully himself. At 32, he was already making waves in the tech industry, his revolutionary cloud security software positioning Morrison Technologies as a rising giant. But his greatest treasure wasn't his company or his growing fortune. It was Isabella. Isabella Chen, with her infectious laugh that could light up an entire room, her brilliant mind that challenged his own, her dancer's grace that made even mundane moments feel choreographed. She was everything he hadn't known he needed. Warm where he was cold, spontaneous where he was calculated, emotionally intuitive where he was analytically rigid. They'd met at an industry conference where she was presenting research on cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Alfred had approached her after her panel, intending to discuss a potential partnership. Instead, they'd talked until the venue staff had literally turned off the lights around them. That night stretched into dawn at an all-night diner, where they discovered a connection that transcended business, transcended logic. Isabella understood the driven man behind the CEO facade. She saw his vulnerability, his fear of failure, his deep-seated need to prove himself that stemmed from a childhood of being overlooked by a father who never thought he'd amount to anything. She didn't just accept these parts of him, she cherished them, transformed them into strengths. "You know what I love about you," Isabella had told him one night, as they lay on the balcony of his modest apartment. This was before the mansion, before the excess, staring at the Boston skyline. "You care so much about everything. Most people go through life half asleep, but you're awake to every detail, every possibility. That's not a flaw, Alfred. That's your superpower." She'd made him believe he could be both successful and happy, that he didn't have to sacrifice one for the other. For 3 years, she'd been his partner in every sense, helping him strategize business moves, grounding him when stress threatened to consume him, celebrating victories and mourning setbacks as if they were her own. They were supposed to get married that October. Isabella had already picked out her dress, a simple, elegant design that reflected her understated beauty. They'd planned a small ceremony, just close friends and family, at a vineyard in Napa Valley. Nothing ostentatious, despite Alfred's growing wealth. Isabella had insisted, "I'm marrying you, not your bank account." But October never came. September 14th. The date was seared into Alfred's memory like a brand. He'd been in Tokyo for a crucial investor meeting, the kind that could catapult Morrison Technologies into the major leagues. Isabella had encouraged him to go, despite it being her birthday week. "Go build your empire, Mr. Morrison," she teased, kissing him goodbye at the airport. "Just promise you'll make it back in time for my birthday dinner. I have a surprise for you." He'd promised. He'd even bought her a necklace in Tokyo, a delicate platinum chain with a small diamond, elegant and understated, just like her. The meeting had gone better than expected. Alfred had secured $50 million in Series C funding. He was on top of the world, already planning how he'd surprise Isabella, maybe move up the wedding date, maybe finally buy that house she'd admired in Brookline. He'd been in the car from the airport, rehearsing what he'd say, when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Is this Alfred Morrison?" A woman's voice, professional but strained. "Yes. Who's this?" "Mr. Morrison, this is Dr. Patricia Wells from Boston General Hospital. I'm calling about Isabella Chen." His world tilted. What about Isabella? Is she okay? The pause that followed lasted an eternity. "Mr. Morrison, I'm very sorry. There's been an accident. Ms. Chen was struck by a vehicle while crossing Boylston Street approximately 2 hours ago. She was brought here, but—" "I'm so sorry, Mr. Morrison. She didn't survive. We did everything we could." Alfred didn't remember the rest of the conversation. Didn't remember telling his driver to take him to the hospital. Didn't remember the blur of corridors, the antiseptic smell, the pitying looks from nurses who somehow knew who he was and why he was there. He only remembered seeing her. Isabella, lying on a hospital bed, looking like she was sleeping except for the bruises, the stillness, the absolute absence of the energy that had defined her. She was wearing the red dress. The one she'd bought for her birthday dinner. The surprise had been a reservation at their favorite hole-in-the-wall Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. Nothing fancy. Just them, celebrating how far they'd come, how far they'd still go together. But she'd never made it to dinner. A drunk driver, running a red light at 6:47 p.m., had ended everything. Alfred had stood there, holding her cold hand, the Tokyo necklace still in his pocket, and something inside him had cracked. Not broken, that would come later. But cracked, a fracture that would widen with each passing day until he became someone he no longer recognized. The 2 years following Isabella's death were simultaneously an eternity and a blur. Alfred threw himself into work with manic intensity, as if he could outrun grief through sheer productivity. Morrison Technologies exploded. He made aggressive acquisitions, pushed his engineers to their limits, expanded into new markets. The company went public 18 months after Isabella's death. Alfred became a billionaire before his 35th birthday. His friends and family watched helplessly as he transformed. The warmth Isabella had cultivated in him evaporated. He became known in the industry as the Ice King, brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. He fired executives for minor mistakes, bought out competitors with hostile takeovers, and built an empire on efficiency and intimidation. At night, alone in the modern mansion he'd bought, all glass and steel, nothing like the cozy home Isabella had dreamed of, he'd pour himself expensive whiskey and stare at her photo. He kept only one, on his nightstand. Isabella laughing at something off camera, her eyes crinkled with joy, her whole face radiant. "I did it," he'd whisper to the photo. "Everything we talked about. The company, the success, all of it. Why doesn't it mean anything?" The photo, of course, never answered. His therapist, a stern woman his mother had guilted him into seeing, called it complicated grief. She suggested he was avoiding processing his loss by obsessing over achievements Isabella would never witness. She recommended grief counseling, support groups, possibly medication. Alfred fired her after 3 sessions. His mother worried. His sister tried to set him up on dates. His few remaining friends staged what amounted to an intervention. But Alfred remained locked in his glass tower, married to his work, faithful to a ghost. Until Ruth Chambers walked into his office on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday, and everything changed again. Ruth came to Morrison Technologies as a junior marketing consultant for a campaign rebrand. Alfred typically didn't involve himself in such minutiae, but his marketing VP had insisted the CEO should at least sit in on the final presentation to show company support. Alfred had agreed with barely concealed irritation, expecting to spend a tedious hour pretending to care about color schemes and brand messaging. He'd walked into the conference room with his phone in hand, already composing an email, not even looking up as the team assembled. Then Ruth had started speaking, and Alfred had made the mistake of glancing up. The words died in his throat. She wasn't Isabella. Her skin was darker, her features different, her hair in long braids instead of Isabella's sleek bob. Objectively, they looked nothing alike. But something in the way Ruth moved, a particular grace in her gestures, a tilt of her head when she listened, the way her eyes lit up when she discussed an idea she was passionate about, it was like watching Isabella's mannerisms inhabiting a different person. And when Ruth laughed at something his CFO said, Alfred felt like he'd been struck by lightning. That laugh. It wasn't identical to Isabella's, but the melody, the genuine warmth, the way it seemed to brighten the entire room, it reached into the frozen wasteland of his chest and found the ember he thought had long since died. He stared. He knew he was staring, knew it was inappropriate, but he couldn't stop. Ruth noticed, her presentation faltering slightly as she met his gaze, a question in her eyes. "Excellent work, Ms. Chambers," he heard himself say when she finished, his voice rougher than intended. "I'd like to discuss some of these concepts further. Can you stay after the meeting?" His marketing VP looked surprised. Alfred never requested follow-up meetings for campaigns, but Ruth had simply nodded, professional but slightly uncertain. When the conference room emptied, Alfred found himself alone with this woman who reminded him of everything he'd lost, and he realized he was in dangerous territory. The smart thing would be to thank her and leave. The healthy thing would be to recognize that this visceral reaction was grief playing tricks on his broken heart. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'd like to offer you a position. Director of Strategic Communications. Report directly to me." Ruth's eyes widened. "Mr. Morrison, I'm flattered, but I'm a junior consultant. I don't have the experience for." "I don't care about your experience. I care about your instincts." He stood, moving closer, watching the way she held her ground despite visible nervousness. "You have something this company needs. Something I need." Even as he said it, he knew the words had a double meaning. Knew he was making a mistake. Knew Isabella would have seen right through this, would have called him out, would have refused to let him use someone else's resemblance to her as a balm for his unhealed wounds. But Isabella was gone. And Ruth was here, real and warm and alive, carrying echoes of the woman he couldn't let go. "I'll need to give notice at my current firm," Ruth said slowly, and Alfred felt something like triumph surge through him. "I'll handle it. Start Monday." As Ruth left, clutching her portfolio with slightly trembling hands, Alfred remained in the conference room, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Boston skyline. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a warning bell was ringing. He ignored it. Ruth Chambers was intelligent, hardworking, and increasingly confused. In her first month at Morrison Technologies, Alfred Morrison had gone from distant CEO to ever-present mentor. He personally reviewed her work, took her to client meetings far above her pay grade, and sought her opinion on decisions that should have gone to C-suite executives. "The boss seems to really believe in you," her assistant mentioned one afternoon, the observation carrying an edge of jealousy. Ruth knew it looked like favoritism. Hell, it was favoritism. But she couldn't understand why. Yes, her campaign presentation had been good, but not revolutionary. There were dozens of more experienced people at Morrison Technologies who could have filled her role. What she didn't know, what Alfred carefully hid, was that he was crafting her into something. Not consciously, not with deliberate malice, but with the unconscious desperation of a man trying to resurrect what he'd lost. He assigned her projects Isabella would have loved. Brought her coffee the way Isabella used to take it, 2 sugars, splash of cream, without asking her preference. Recommended books Isabella had mentioned. Even started taking her to the Italian restaurant where he and Isabella had their first date, telling himself it was just a convenient lunch spot, ignoring the way his chest ached with bittersweet pain every time Ruth laughed in that familiar way. Ruth, for her part, found herself drawn to this complicated man despite her better judgment. Alfred Morrison had a reputation as cold and ruthless, but with her, he showed flashes of something else: vulnerability, dark humor, unexpected kindness. He remembered details she'd mentioned in passing. He challenged her intellectually in ways no one ever had. And when he looked at her with those intense grey eyes, she felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. She didn't know that when Alfred looked at her, he was seeing a palimpsest, her face overlaid with Isabella's memory. 6 months into her tenure, Alfred asked her to dinner. A real dinner, not a working meal. "I don't think that's appropriate," Ruth said, even as her heart raced. "You're my boss." Then quit. Alfred's response was immediate, intense. "If that's the only thing stopping you, Ruth, quit. I'll match your salary, give you 6 months severance, write you a recommendation that will get you hired anywhere in the industry. Just have dinner with me." The raw need in his voice should have been a red flag. Instead, Ruth found it devastating. Here was one of the most powerful men in Boston, making himself vulnerable for her. One dinner, she agreed, telling herself she was being foolish, unable to stop herself anyway. That first dinner led to a second, then a third. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Alfred courted her with an intensity that was almost frightening. Expensive gifts, surprise weekend trips, public declarations that left Ruth dizzy with the speed of it all. "Are you sure about this?" her best friend Keisha asked after Ruth breathlessly recounted a trip to Paris where Alfred had rented out an entire restaurant. "Girl, this man is moving fast. And he's your boss. This has red flags all over it." "I know how it looks," Ruth admitted. "But Keisha, when I'm with him, I feel, I don't know, important, cherished. He sees me in a way no one else does." What Ruth didn't see, what she couldn't see, was that Alfred wasn't seeing her at all. He was seeing the ghost of Isabella, projected onto Ruth's life like a film over a screen. Every gesture of affection, every intimate moment, every whispered "I love you" was said to a composite woman who didn't exist, part Ruth, part Isabella, part desperate fantasy. Alfred proposed after 8 months of dating. It was too soon. Ruth knew it, her friends knew it, even Alfred's family expressed concern. But Alfred was insistent, almost desperate. "Life is short, Ruth," he told her, holding her hands on the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights glittering below them. "I learned that the hard way. When you find something real, something that matters, you don't wait. You grab it and hold on." Ruth, at 28, thought she was that real thing. Thought she was what mattered. She didn't know she was a life raft for a drowning man, something to cling to not because of who she was, but because she kept him from sinking completely into the abyss of his grief. She said yes. The wedding was elegant, expensive, and somehow impersonal. Alfred had hired the best planners, told Ruth to get whatever she wanted, but he was curiously distant from the actual planning. When Ruth asked his opinion on flowers, venues, or music, he'd defer entirely to her or seem annoyed by the questions. "Just make it perfect," he'd say, already looking at his phone. "You have my credit card. Do whatever you want." Ruth told herself he was just busy with work. Told herself it was sweet that he trusted her vision. Ignored the hollow feeling that grew with each decision she made alone. The wedding took place on a sunny October day, exactly 5 years after the October that Isabella and Alfred had planned for their wedding. Ruth didn't know this. Alfred never spoke about Isabella. When Ruth had cautiously asked about past relationships, Alfred had gone cold. "My past is my past. What matters is our future." The ceremony was beautiful. Ruth wore a stunning dress, beaded bodice, flowing skirt. The image uploaded to this conversation captured the moment perfectly, and carried a bouquet of white roses and eucalyptus. Alfred stood at the altar in an impeccable black suit, looking every inch the successful CEO. But as they took their vows, as Ruth spoke her promises with shining eyes and genuine love, Alfred felt a strange dissonance. The words came automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about Isabella, about the vows they'd never gotten to exchange, about the wedding that never happened. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Alfred kissed Ruth, and tasted regret. In the wedding photos, they looked like the perfect couple, beautiful, successful, in love. But if you looked closely at Alfred's eyes in those pictures, you could see something missing. Some essential spark of presence, of being fully there in that moment. The reception was lavish. Alfred gave a short speech thanking everyone for coming, called Ruth the most important person in my life, and raised a glass to their future. He said all the right words with none of the right feeling. Ruth danced with her father, beaming with happiness, believing she'd just married the love of her life. Across the reception hall, Alfred danced with his mother, who whispered in his ear with concern, "Are you sure about this, sweetheart? Are you marrying Ruth, or are you still mourning Isabella?" Alfred had stiffened, pulled away. "Isabella is dead. Ruth is my wife. That's all that matters." But his mother saw the truth he couldn't admit. Her son had just married a substitute, and everyone was going to pay the price for his inability to grieve properly. The first year of marriage was a masterclass in beautiful dysfunction. To the outside world, Alfred and Ruth Morrison were the power couple. He the tech titan, she the elegant wife who'd left her career to support his and manage their social obligations. They attended galas, hosted dinner parties, smiled for society pages. Behind closed doors, cracks appeared. Ruth quickly realized that Alfred's intensity during courtship had evaporated. He worked late constantly, often sleeping in his home office. When they were together, he was physically present but emotionally absent, scrolling through his phone during dinner, cutting conversations short, showing interest only when Ruth said or did something that reminded him of Isabella, though Ruth didn't know that's what was happening. She tried everything. Cooked his favorite meals. Planned romantic surprises. Initiated conversations about starting a family, about dreams and plans and building a life together. Alfred engaged superficially, gave vague agreements, but never truly participated. "It's like living with a ghost," Ruth confessed to Keisha during a rare lunch outside the mansion. "He's there, but he's not there. Sometimes he looks at me, and I swear he's seeing someone else." "Have you talked to him about it?" Keisha asked, her concern evident. "I've tried. He says he's just stressed with work. But Keisha, it's more than that. Sometimes he'll call me by another name, just for a second, then he corrects himself. And there's this photo in his office, in a drawer I saw once when I was looking for printer paper. A woman I don't recognize. Asian, beautiful, laughing. When I asked about it, he got angry. Said I was invading his privacy. Girl, that's not normal. You need to demand answers." But Ruth didn't. She told herself she was being paranoid, that every relationship had adjustment periods, that successful men like Alfred needed patient partners. She swallowed her hurt and tried harder, taking on a shape Alfred seemed to want without realizing he wanted her to be someone she could never be. Alfred, meanwhile, was drowning in his own contradictions. Ruth was perfect, kind, intelligent, beautiful, patient. Any man would be grateful to have her as a wife. But she wasn't Isabella, and every difference highlighted what he'd lost. When Ruth laughed too loudly at parties, he'd flinch, remembering how Isabella had this perfect, melodic laugh that never overwhelmed. When Ruth expressed opinions on his business, he'd bristle, forgetting that Isabella used to challenge him constantly, but her challenges had felt different, more insightful. When Ruth wanted to redecorate the mansion with warmer colors and personal touches, he'd shut her down, preserving the cold, sterile aesthetic because changing it felt like betraying Isabella's memory. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, unable to love Ruth for who she was because he was still in love with who Isabella had been. The worst moments came at night. Ruth would initiate intimacy, and Alfred would respond mechanically, his body present but his mind elsewhere. Afterward, he'd roll away, and Ruth would lie awake, feeling more alone than when she'd been single. Once, she made the mistake of crying. Alfred had heard, turned back, and for a moment, Something like genuine concern crossed his face. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Do you even love me?" The question escaped before Ruth could stop it. "Really love me, Alfred? Or am I just convenient?" Alfred had stiffened, his walls slamming back into place. "Why would you ask something like that? I married you, didn't I? I provide for you, don't I? That's not love. That's obligation. What do you want from me, Ruth?" His voice carried an edge of desperation. "I give you everything. The house, the lifestyle, anything you want to buy. What more do you need?" "I need you," Ruth whispered. "The real you. Not the corporate Alfred, not the distant stranger. The man who courted me, who made me feel like I mattered. What happened to him?" Alfred had stood up, pulled on a robe, headed for the door. "That man was a fantasy. This is reality. The sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be." He'd slept in his office that night. And the next. By the end of the week, they'd fallen into a new pattern. Polite roommates who occasionally shared a bed, presenting a united front to the world while dying slowly in private. The crisis came during their 3rd anniversary dinner. Ruth had planned everything meticulously. A private table at that Italian restaurant Alfred always took her to, a dress she knew he liked, a carefully rehearsed speech about how they needed to see a counselor, how she couldn't continue living as a shadow in her own marriage. Alfred arrived 20 minutes late, distracted, checking his phone. "Sorry," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. "Market crash in Asia. Had to handle it." Ruth took a deep breath, centered herself. "It's fine. I'm glad you're here." They ordered. The restaurant was the same as always, but Ruth suddenly saw it differently, saw how Alfred's eyes lingered on certain tables, how his expression held something like pain when he looked around. Had he brought Isabella here? Was that why he kept returning, not because it was convenient, but because it was a shrine? "Alfred," she started, her prepared speech crumbling in the face of this revelation. "This restaurant. Did you come here with someone before me?" He froze, wine glass halfway to his lips. "Why are you asking that?" "Because I need to know. Because I've spent 3 years feeling like I'm competing with a ghost, and I need to know if I'm crazy." "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" Ruth's voice rose despite her intention to stay calm. "Tell me, Alfred. Tell me about the woman in the photo in your office drawer. Tell me about the name you sometimes call me when you're half asleep. Tell me why you flinch every time I suggest painting the bedroom, or why you bought me a platinum necklace for our 1st anniversary that was clearly meant for someone else. It didn't even fit right, Alfred. Tell me why I'm your wife but I don't feel like your partner." The restaurant had gone quiet. Other diners were trying not to stare. Alfred's jaw was tight, his eyes cold. "We are not doing this here," he said flatly. "Then where? When? Because you never want to talk about anything real. You're perfectly happy living in this beautiful lie, but I'm suffocating in it." Alfred stood abruptly, threw cash on the table. "Let's go." The car ride home was silent, tension thick enough to choke on. When they entered the mansion, Alfred headed straight for his office. Ruth followed, done with being passive, done with accepting scraps. "No," she said firmly. "You don't get to walk away this time. I deserve answers." Alfred turned, and Ruth took a step back at the raw pain in his face. "You want answers?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Fine." Her name was Isabella. Isabella Chen. She was the love of my life. We were going to get married. And then a drunk driver killed her 5 years ago, 3 weeks before our wedding. The words landed like blows. Ruth felt the room spin. This restaurant? Our first date spot. Your laugh. Sometimes it sounds like hers. The way you tilt your head. She used to do that. The necklace? I bought it for her in Tokyo. She died before I could give it to her. Each revelation was a knife. Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to look away. "So yes, Ruth. You're competing with a ghost. And you know what? You're losing. Because no matter how good you are, how perfect you try to be, You're not her. You'll never be her. The words hung in the air, brutal and final. Alfred seemed to realize what he'd said, reached out as if to take it back, but Ruth stepped away. Is that why you married me? Her voice was barely a whisper. Because I remind you of her. Alfred's silence was answer enough. Ruth felt something break inside her, not just her heart, but her sense of self. For 3 years, she'd twisted herself into knots, tried to be whatever Alfred needed, blamed herself for not being enough. And the whole time, she'd been cast as the understudy in someone else's life story. I want to see her, Ruth said quietly. What? Isabella. I want to see a picture of her. The real one, not whatever fantasy you've built in your head. Alfred hesitated, then walked to his desk, opened the locked bottom drawer. He pulled out a framed photo and handed it to Ruth. Ruth looked at the woman in the picture. Beautiful, yes, but not similar to her at all. Different features, different coloring, different everything. The only similarity was something intangible, some quality of warmth and life captured in the photograph. We don't even look alike, Ruth said, confused. No, Alfred admitted. Not in obvious ways. But something about you, the way you move, the way you laugh, certain expressions. Enough to make me believe I could get back what I lost. Enough to make me selfish. Ruth set the photo down carefully. You know what the saddest part is? I loved you. The real you, not some ghost or substitute. I loved your intensity, your complexity, even your damage. I would have helped you heal if you'd let me. But you never saw me. Not really. I was just a band-aid for a wound that never closed. Ruth, Alfred started, but she held up a hand. I need to think. I'm going to stay with Keisha for a few days. You don't have to leave. This is your home. Ruth laughed bitterly.
No, Alfred.
This is your mausoleum. I'm just haunting it. She packed a bag while Alfred stood helplessly in the doorway of their bedroom. When she left, he didn't try to stop her. He stood in the empty mansion, surrounded by all his success, all his wealth, all the things that meant nothing, and felt the full weight of what he'd done. For 3 years, he'd used Ruth as a shield against grief. Had married her not despite the fact that she reminded him of Isabella, but because of it. Had tried to resurrect the past instead of building a future. And now he'd hurt an innocent person who'd done nothing but love him. Alfred sank into his office chair, picked up Isabella's photo, and for the first time in 5 years, he truly grieved. Not the performative grief of the funeral or the suppressed grief he'd channeled into work, but raw, ugly, breaking open grief. He'd lost Isabella. And in refusing to accept that loss, he'd destroyed Ruth. He'd become the villain in his own story. Ruth spent 2 weeks at Keisha's apartment, crying, thinking, and slowly reconstructing her sense of self. Keisha, bless her, didn't say I told you so, just held her friend and let her process. I feel like an idiot, Ruth said one night, curled up on Keisha's couch with wine and tissues. All the signs were there. How did I miss them? Love makes us blind, Keisha said gently. And you're not an idiot for believing someone when they said they loved you. But did he? Love me, I mean? Or was it always her? Keisha considered carefully. I think he wanted to love you. I think part of him did. But he never gave you, or himself, a fair chance. He was too busy mourning to live. Ruth thought about the 3 years she'd spent as Mrs. Alfred Morrison. The galas, the charitable board she joined at Alfred's request, the careful performance of being the perfect CEO's wife. She'd abandoned her own career, her own ambitions, to support his. Had slowly erased herself, becoming smaller and quieter, trying to fit into whatever shape would make Alfred happy. And for what? To be a placeholder, a living memorial to a dead woman. The anger came slowly, building like a storm. Not just at Alfred, but at herself. How had she allowed this? When had she become so passive, so willing to accept crumbs of affection? I need to go back, Ruth announced one morning, startling Keisha, who was making coffee. Back to the mansion. Girl, are you sure? Not to stay. To pack. To end this properly. Ruth's voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. I've been hiding here, licking my wounds. But I'm not the one who should be ashamed. He is. Keisha hugged her. That's my Ruth. I was wondering when she'd come back. Ruth returned to the mansion on a Tuesday morning, knowing Alfred would be at the office. She packed systematically, taking only what was truly hers: clothes, books, the few personal items she'd managed to accumulate in a house that never felt like home. The expensive jewelry Alfred had given her, she left. The designer wardrobe, she left. She wanted nothing that came from obligation or guilt. As she packed, she found herself in Alfred's office, looking at the photo of Isabella one more time. She'd spent so much energy hating this ghost, but looking at Isabella's laughing face, Ruth felt only sadness. I'm sorry, she said to the photo. Sorry that you died. Sorry that he couldn't let you go. But I'm not you, and I'm done trying to be. Ruth sat at Alfred's desk and wrote him a letter. Not an angry screed, not a list of grievances, but something more profound. A goodbye that was also a mirror, reflecting back the truth of what their marriage had been. Alfred, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not to Keisha's this time, but truly gone. I've filed for divorce. My lawyer will be in contact. I've spent 2 weeks trying to understand how we got here, and I've realized something. You're not a villain. You're just a man who never learned how to grieve. You loved Isabella so much that when you lost her, you lost yourself too. I understand that. What I can't accept is that you made your unprocessed grief my problem. You know what hurts most. It's not that you loved someone before me. It's not even that you still love her. It's that you looked at me, really looked at me, and decided I was good enough to remind you of her, but not good enough to be loved for myself. I was an echo, a shadow, a substitute. Never the real thing. For 3 years, I tried to earn your love. I tried to be perfect, to be understanding, to be patient. I made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding. I turned myself into a supporting character in your tragedy. And I hate that I did that. Not because you forced me, you didn't. But because I betrayed myself trying to win someone who was never really available. You need help, Alfred. Real help. Not a new relationship or a work project to obsess over, but actual therapy to process your loss. Until you do that, you'll keep hurting people. You'll keep running from grief instead of through it. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just sad. Sad for what we could have been if you'd been brave enough to really see me. Sad for Isabella, who deserved better than to have her memory weaponized. Sad for you, because you're still trapped in that moment 5 years ago, unable to move forward. I release you from our marriage. More importantly, I release myself. I deserve to be someone's first choice, not their consolation prize. I deserve to be loved for who I am, not who I remind someone of. I hope you find peace. I really do. But I can't be the one to give it to you. Ruth. *P.S. The woman in your photo? She's beautiful. I can see why you love her. But Alfred, she's gone. And continuing to worship at the altar of what you lost means you'll never appreciate what you have. I hope someday you learn the difference. Ruth left the letter on the kitchen counter, propped against a vase of wilting roses Alfred had sent the previous week as an apology she hadn't acknowledged. She took one last look at the mansion, this beautiful, empty cage, and walked out. She didn't cry. She'd done enough crying. We're going to continue from where we stop in the next video. Thanks for taking your precious time watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment where you are watching from.